Okay, everyone, last group factoring problem. Let's do it. So, in this problem, again, if you have 4 terms, that is telling you that group factoring is your only option if you're trying to factor. Okay, so since I have 4 terms, I know I need to be using group factoring. Okay, so again, all you gotta do, we're gonna group the first 2 terms and the last 2 terms. We're gonna factor out the GCFs. And then at the very end, we group together the GCFs and the term that should have repeated in each of the parentheses. And after that, we'll be done. So let's get started. So I'm going to group together my first 2 terms, which they are 2dw to the third plus w squared. All right, and then my last 2 terms are negative 14w minus 7. Okay, so let's factor out the GCF. Okay, so in my first parenthesis, I don't see a number in front of my my w squared, so there secretly is a 1 there. Okay, so what is the largest number that will divide into 2 and 1? It would just be a 1. So you can write 1 if you want to. Again, I'm a mathematician and we're lazy, so I'm not going to write the 1. But you can write, well, maybe I will actually. I'm going to write the 1 for now. But you don't have to. Okay, and then when you have your variables, you're going to pick the one with the lowest exponent. So which one has the lowest exponent? It would be the w squared. So my GCF is 1w squared. Okay, and then now I'm going to look at the GCF in my second parenthesis. Now, first of all, remember whenever you factor, you do not like your leading coefficient to be negative. Okay, that's a big no-no. Okay, and I'm also going to explain why this is necessary as well. Okay, but you don't need to have a negative leading coefficient. So, since factoring ends up dividing, when we find the GCF, we divide the GCF into both terms. Okay, so since I'm going to divide negative 14 by a number, and I don't want that to be a negative anymore, what can you divide a negative by to transform it into a positive? You would divide it by a negative. Okay, so if you ever see that your leading coefficient is a negative, make sure you also will factor out a negative. Don't forget that or the demon cats will get you. Okay, so then what is the largest number that will divide into 14 and 7? Of course you guys are right. It would be 7. Okay, and both terms do not have a w in them, so I'm not going to include w in my GCF. Okay, so then after this, we're going to write our GCF in the front and divide each term by your GCF. Okay, so this one is, you can write w squared or 1w squared. It really doesn't matter. Okay, and I'm going to divide both of these bad boys by 1w squared. Okay, so 2 divided by 1 is 2. W to the third divided by w squared. What do you do with exponents when you divide? You do subtract the exponents. So 3 minus 2 will be w to the first, or just w. Okay, and then 1 divided by 1 is 1. Okay, and w squared divided by w squared, anything divided by itself is 1. So it cancels and turns to 1. So that whole thing, remember, when things cancel out, they don't just like vanish into thin air. Okay? Anything divided by itself is a 1. So don't forget it's a 1. Okay? So remember, you guys, if I did this correctly, I should end up with the same thing in this parenthesis. I should end up with a 2w plus 1. If I don't end up with a 2w plus 1, then I did something wrong. So let's see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to divide by my GCF, which in this case is a negative 7. Okay, and then I'm going to divide each of these by negative 7. Now, let's say, the demon cats tend to get us every once in a while, me more than you guys. Okay, but let's say that you forgot that your leading coefficient can't be negative. Let's just say that you're like, well, the largest number that goes into 14 and 7 is 7, and you tried to divide this by positive 7. Okay, so negative 14w divided by 7 would be a negative 2w, and negative 7 divided by 7 is negative 1. You would have ended up with a negative 2w minus 1. Okay, so you would have ended up with the same thing as over here, except your signs would be the opposite. 2w would be negative 2w, and 1 would be negative 1. Okay, so if you ever end up with your second parentheses being exactly like the first one, just opposite signs, that is not okay. You still need them to be the same exact thing. So that is giving you a hint that you should have also factored out a negative 1 to transform all the signs to be the same as this one. Okay, so if you end up with the same thing except different signs, what you can do is, in addition to what you factored out, you could also factor out a negative 1 to change all the signs. So just saying, like if you factored out a 7, that would tell you also need to factor out a negative. Okay, but don't forget, your leading coefficient can't be negative. So that's another way for you to know. Okay, so let's get going on the problem again. So negative 14 divided by negative 7, well, that is a 2. And I don't have anything to divide w by, so I'm just going to bring on down that w. Okay, and negative 7 divided by negative 7 is a positive 1. Look at that, you guys. We ended up with the same thing. Whoa. Me wow, right? Me wow. That was a board slapper. Oh, man. Okay, let's keep going. So, for your final answer, after you factor out the GCF of the first two terms and the last two terms, all you have to do at the very end is group together the GCFs and group together the factor or the term that repeated. And then you're done. Okay, so my two GCFs are these right here. So I have a 1w squared or a w squared, however you want to write that. And then I have a negative 7 or a minus 7. Okay, and then after that, I write in here the part that repeated, which is this 2w plus 1. And that's it, you guys. That's how you group factor. Pretty cool, right? There we go. Nice work.